Thank you, Tim. Let me go ahead and share. Do you have my slides back?
I see them.
Excellent. All right, well, hello everybody, and thank you for joining me here on this last day of Drupal GovCon 2020. I'm Mike Madison. I'm from Acquia. I'm also one of the organizers of the conference. And I'm really excited to talk to you today about automated accessibility testing. If you don't know me, if you don't already follow me on Twitter, or if you haven't checked out my blog, please do. I pretty regularly post Drupal content a couple times a week. Always looking for more folks to engage with online. So please do track me down. So today what we're going to be really talking about is how to integrate automated accessibility testing into a Drupal project. Now, if we happen to have folks watching this in the future or live today that are doing things other than Drupal, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about today is general for web. It doesn't have to be Drupal. Some of what we're talking about today will be very Drupal specific. So miles will vary slightly as we continue. But in general, I wanted to start out with this question of, why should you automate accessibility testing? And I thought of sort of three reasons, and by no means am I proposing one or all of these reasons are going to apply to you. But number one, you want to provide the best possible experience on your site and platform for everybody, no matter their ability to see or navigate using keyboard and mouse. Perhaps because you're a government organization or some other organization that has regulations around you, you are legally or contractually obligated to provide an accessible experience. And it is also possible that you just simply don't want to get sued. While personally, I prefer the first option, like let's give the best possible experience. What we're talking about today would help you out in all of these situations. I also want to start right up front and tell you that using something like Pa11y will help you accomplish these goals. But it is insufficient by itself to accomplish these goals. And what I mean by that is if you get Pa11y all wired up and you have it running and you do a round of high fives around your team and that's all you do, you probably still don't have an accessible site. You probably still don't have an accessible product. So Pa11y is the barest minimum, lowest bar, most basic level of accessibility testing that you can do. We're going to talk about what that means as we get going today. But setting expectations appropriately, it is a part of accessibility testing. It is not all of your accessibility testing. So let's talk about what Pa11y is. Pa11y is a very clever add-on to the word ally, which is commonly used for accessibility. It's a command line tool that can be used to essentially test the markup of web pages. And much like other test runners, right, thinking about PHP unit, Nightwatch, Behat, pick your poison, what Pa11y essentially does is it pulls up a page, it tests the markup of that page, and then it's going to give you an alert if the markup of that page does not conform to a particular standard. And of course, there's a bajillion accessibility standards out there, and you can tell Pa11y which one you're following, right? If you're, doing WCAG 2.0 AA on one project, WCAG 2.0 AAA on a different project, whatever, you can configure Pa11y to support those different standards depending on the circumstances that you're working in. Furthering what I was saying about a disclaimer, Pa11y's not a real person, right? So as I just said, Pa11y is going to scrape a website, it's going to look at your markup, and it's going to tell you whether or not that markup passes accessibility standards or not. That's no guarantee that the page is actually accessible, right? The only way to know for sure that your site is actually accessible, it's to do manual testing using a keyboard to tab through and make sure that you don't get stuck in your menu or lose focus somewhere halfway down the page. Use a screen reader to actually browse through and make sure that the ARIA labels and the other key elements on your site are not printing out gobbledygook and, you know, like dictating a book to somebody just because they hovered over a link. And it's definitely not a person who has trouble seeing or interacting, right? So the experience that an automated test runner has is nowhere close to the experience that a real person is going to have. I also want to be really clear that Pa11y does not do anything that you don't tell it to do, just like any automated testing framework. So again, enabling Pa11y on a site, great. We're going to teach you how to do that today. But just because you've got it on does not mean that you now are completely testing everything in the world. It's only going to test what you configure it to test. And particularly with a Drupal site, that can be quite complex. So we're going to start with 2 quick takeaways. First of all, automated accessibility testing is not a golden ticket to passing an accessibility audit or meeting whatever legal or regulatory obligations you have to meet accessibility criteria. It's a big part in making sure that you get there. It's a big part in making sure that you stay there. But it's not a magic bullet. It's not a golden ticket. The other thing, to give you one of my favorite Pinterest fails, as with any automated testing framework, Pa11y is only going to be as good as you make it out to be. So if you're testing, you know, if you test 1 page of your site, maybe that page passes. But if you have 2,000 pages of content and you're not testing all of it, yeah, well, you know, you got a lot more that could be unaccessible or inaccessible. Let me throw a concept at you real quick. And I actually blogged about this in the last week. Believe it or not, you and your team are the thing that is most likely to make a Drupal site inaccessible. If you take a Drupal 9 site or a Drupal 8 site and install it out of the box, you actually have a wildly accessible experience. Now you're going to say, and I hear you, Mike, there's nothing in a vanilla Drupal site. And that's true, there's not. But let's peel back the layers on that a little bit, right? The things that make a site inaccessible are usually content, the design, and how you present those 2 things to your user, right? Who's building all that stuff? It's you, it's me, it's not Drupal. So there will be times when you might find a contrib module or some nook or cranny of Drupal itself that are not actually going to pass an accessibility audit, but I would say those are few and far between. By far, 95+% of what you're going to run into in a Drupal site is inaccessible because of something you and your development team or your content team or your design team did as part of your build. And I don't say that to throw you under the bus. I do that to raise awareness because so frequently as you're putting content, as you're working out a design, as you're doing some building, your head's down focused on that task and you're losing track of the accessibility perspective. So keep in mind, you have the most impact of anybody on the accessibility on your site. And this is the blog article I was talking about, right? The 5 most common mistakes I see, and I get into this in the article, we won't spend a ton of time on this today, but an improperly configured WYSIWYG, right? So letting people like hard code tables or do a bunch of divs and spans, anything that's going to impact layout directly in the WYSIWYG, you're going to tank your accessibility like 100% of the time. Directly embedded images or videos in your WYSIWYG using a file field versus using an actual media entity. Again, if you're using a media entity, you have a lot more control over the display of that image. You can require the alt text field. You can do something to actually impact the accessibility of the site. An isolated design process. If your design team completely builds out your site and never does any testing on the design before you start building it, again, you're just about guaranteed to have a bunch of accessibility issues, if nothing else, color contrast issues. Requirements communication. I usually assume that most developers are not accessibility experts because most developers are not accessibility experts. So as you're telling a developer any requirements that they might need to actually implement on the site in terms of put this here, architect it this way, write these sorts of tests, you should also be telling them, do this sort of accessibility, make sure you're addressing these standards, make sure you're building things in this way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, the last one, only doing something like Pa11y, right? Doing Pa11y is better than nothing, as I've already said, but you want to make sure that you're doing other accessibility testing with a screen reader, with a keyboard, etc. So here are some high-level goals for you to take away from this presentation. Anytime you build something, particularly if that thing is impacting markup, right? So hopefully basic site building doesn't do a lot of markup impacting, right? Your theming tickets, front-end tickets, sometimes back-end tickets, but usually the thing that's going to impact layout and markup is going to come in from your front-end work. You should be doing some sort of automated accessibility testing, and whether that's manually running a lighthouse check in Chrome, using Pa11y, whatever, you should be doing something every time you build. And then if you are finding issues, obviously you want to fix those issues at the time. That way those tests will continue to pass. And then as you add new functionality into your site, you want to expand your automated accessibility testing. That way, the next time somebody does work on that feature, if they accidentally screw something up, you're going to get a warning about it. Again, this is baseline stuff. So let's look at what a Pa11y test looks like. And this is wildly different from PHP unit. This is wildly different from Behat, because basically all you have to do to get Pa11y working is you tell it what standard you're testing against. And on the GovCon site, we're doing WCAG 2.0 AA. We can tell it to specifically ignore certain things should we want to. In this case, we're not testing we're not testing for SVG images or anything like that. And then you're telling it where to run. Now, again, this is a proof of concept test, so we're not actually doing a lot here. We're just testing the homepage of this site. And to add additional Pa11y tests on the Pa11y side, all you really have to do is expand out this URLs array, in this case, and tell it which additional pages that you want to actually test. So super easy. You just say, hey, I want to test my schedule page and my session page and my about page and my sponsors page and all of those fun things, and you're all set. And that's it. High five, everybody. We're done. Accessibility. We're gonna just call it a day there. And no, actually, that's not true, because as I've said a couple of times, running accessibility testing on a site requires markup. And again, joking aside, going to the homepage of the GovCon site and testing that page during continuous integration, that does me zero good if there isn't a homepage, right? So we have to make sure wiring up Pa11y is only part of this equation. We have to make sure that when we're structuring our tests, we have the actual theme and the markup that is required to populate the theme, and we have to make sure that we have content. So in the Drupal world, to give Pa11y those two things, markup and content, that typically means we need a handful of things. We need the configuration for the Drupal site, so configuration management, whatever that might be. We need Drupal itself up and running, right? Drupal can't serve a web page if you can't visit Drupal. If Drupal is going to run, that means you need a web server, you need a database server, you need a container, you need sort of everything required to get up and running with Drupal. Now, if you happen to be doing this locally, that's really easily accomplished with Drupal VM, Lando, Doxel, DDev, pick your poison. If you're using continuous integration, hopefully you've already got some of these things set up. If you don't, that is a whole different topic in and of itself. But at the end of the day, for Pa11y to test markup, there is no such thing as just testing markup, right? You have to have all of this other stuff in place to be able to do that testing. So this is the homepage from a couple weeks ago of DrupalGovCon.org. Looking at this, just in this screenshot, you can see that we've got the proper theme. Everything's ready to go for 2020. We've got our assets in place. So we've got a couple of different blocks here. We've got a number of different pieces of content to populate the announcements in the homepage. We've got our menu bar in place, including the menu links. And as you scroll down the page, we've got other like social media stuff, sponsor content, et cetera, et cetera. So for us to fully populate the homepage of the GovCon site, there's actually quite a few features and quite a bit of work that has gone into making this page look like this. And if we want to do an accessibility test on the homepage and know that the experience that all of you and anybody else that has when they're visiting GovCon is accessible, all of this stuff has to be there for us to test it. If all I'm testing is the basic theme without any of the content, without the blocks, without the content, we don't know for sure that this button is accessible. We don't know for sure that the way we've structured this announcements section or the header is accessible, right? It all needs to be there. So a couple of general Drupal automated testing guidelines, and these are things that actually I firmly believe should apply to not just Pa11y, but Behat and PHP Unit, et cetera. Don't rely on a database sync. Upstream databases change all the time, and if you're running automated tests, you want to make sure that if you get a test failure, that failure is related to a downstream change, right? So I've just added a new component to my site. All of a sudden, I've got accessibility testing failures. Are things failing because of the work I did, or did somebody change the database on prod and now we have to sort through that, right? Yeah, you don't want that. Don't pull a prod database during an automated test run. So build everything out clean. That includes configuration importing. Create your content as part of the build. We'll talk about how to do that in a moment, or import your content from like default content. There's two approaches then, getting a little tighter into your automated testing. There's two approaches that you can take for accessibility testing. The first is that you can replicate real content. So if I wanted to test sessions, if I wanted to test the homepage, whatever, I could actually run around and export one session or a couple of session nodes. I could export all of the announcements needed to populate the homepage and store all of that in default content. For the GovCon site, that's pretty straightforward because our site is very pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple. I've built other platforms for other organizations where you know, there's 25 or 30 different custom block types that are used to populate the homepage and other landing pages. And making sure that you have automated test coverage for all of that, plus all of the content types, that can get a little sticky to actually do approach one. So in approach two, you can kind of cheat a little bit. And you can use real blocks, but put them on like conglomerated pages. So you can build a landing page that itself is fake, but it is full of, you know, 25 or 31 of each different type of component that you've built with custom blocks. So you have representative content. So Carl's asking about database sanitization for sites with PII for automated testing. I mean, this is part of the reason I'm saying don't sync a database. If you're installing a new site during your continuous integration process, you don't have to worry about PII, right? Because you're not syncing real user data down, you're installing from nothing. So your new site's not gonna have anything in it that would affect PII if you're not syncing. So the second approach that I'm talking about here in terms of representative content, again, this is a component-based approach. And, you know, this works really well if you're using the Layout Builder, Panelizer, Site Studio from Acquia, et cetera, where you're doing this sort of component-based design and you're not just doing a bunch of content types. You know, this is something that is not a Drupal concept. This is something that works really well with design systems. And it's actually great for accessibility, because if you have a hero banner component, again, custom block type, and you have beat the hell out of this custom block type to make sure that it works, to make sure that it is accessible, to make sure that under any circumstances, if I place a hero banner someplace, it's fine. At that point, it doesn't matter how many hero banners you have. It doesn't matter if you put them on landing pages or basic pages or session pages or wherever. You can put them at the top of the page, at the bottom of the page. You can put them anywhere you want. And because you're doing this testing-based, component-based approach, you know that your hero banner is always accessible. Pair that with sort of the traditional old school Drupal 6, Drupal 7 way of thinking about content, where 5 of your content types need a hero banner. Well, we're now going to implement a hero banner on 5 different content types. That's not component-based design, right? We have now 5 different instances of a hero banner, and they're each implemented slightly differently in each different place. You actually would need to do accessibility testing on each different implementation of that hero banner or those hero banners to make sure that your article hero is equally accessible to your session hero, for example. Question from David: can you use Pa11y to automatically test production content, since content editors can break accessibility compliance? Yeah, you can. I would say that on an ideally configured Drupal site, and with all due respect to any content folks on the call, a content editor should not be able to break the accessibility of a Drupal site. If the WYSIWYG is set up in such a way that a content editor can break the accessibility, I would say that you have improperly secured your WYSIWYG. Now, that's not to say that things don't happen, right? But the most common issues with content creation with accessibility is, oh, we didn't put an alt title on that image. Well, configure your images so they have to put an alt title in. They're putting tables in that aren't accessible. Well, don't let them put tables into the WYSIWYG, right? Set up a block or a form with the required fields so they have to make it accessible. So yes, it is possible for a content editor to break accessibility compliance, but again, my job as an architect, my development team's job is to make sure that every component that we build, every content type that we build, everything that we build, when people are creating content and working with it, it's always going to spit out accessible content no matter what. So yeah, we talked about this a little bit. All right, so let's talk about this example in practice with component-based design. So this is University of Texas, their health school in San Antonio, UT Health San Antonio. And this particular site is a great example of this sort of component-based design. So let me just pull this up real quick so we can see what this looks like. So again, on their homepage, they have a hero banner. They have these little cards that you can drop on the page, and they have these news stories that you can drop on the page and other blocks as well. And using Layout Builder or using Panelizer or using some of the other sort of modern Drupal tools, the idea is that this banner or these cards or these stories can be used in different permutations on different pages. So maybe we don't want this, or if we do have this, maybe it goes all the way down at the bottom right next to the footer or whatever. Again, start thinking about your pages not as one big sort of uber content type, but in these reusable components that you can use and stick in different places. Once we've determined that this block is accessible, you can use it anywhere on your site and it should still be accessible. All right. So again, to test something like that, we want to make sure that every content type that we've built out is going to have a node page. So we need to visit at least one representative node page. Any view pages that you've built, yep, we're going to want to test those too. And then having some testing pages to test out your representative blocks is important. So at the end of the day, you don't need to test, say you've got 500 possible pages of content on your site. You don't need Pa11y to go and visit 500 pages, but you do want Pa11y to hit sort of a representation of all of the different types of content and all of the different sort of features that you built, little f features, not the Drupal features module, but just features in general that you've built out on your site. Tim asks, have you ever tested or considered testing against an automatically generated component library as part of accessibility testing, rather than in addition to content inside of Drupal? So are you talking about like in a style guide or something like that?
Yes.
You can do that. The advantage of doing the testing in Drupal itself, so if you're testing it just in the style guide, what you're doing is you're making sure that the theme markup is accessible, and that's important, and that's viable. The advantage of testing it on the Drupal side is you're also making sure that the site building and the output of Drupal itself is accessible. So, I mean, sure, yeah, if you have a style guide wired up on your project, it's not a bad thing to test, but actually testing the output from Drupal itself is you're getting as close to the source as possible there. So I would recommend testing from Drupal. Because, hey, this actually fits in very nicely. You want to make sure that each component that Drupal is rendering actually is rendering properly, and each variation of that component. So back to the original question that David asked a moment ago about what happens if your content authors are doing something that's silly and inaccessible. You know, ideally you would structure your builds to have every permutation, right? I've built custom blocks before where the content author can say, okay, I've got this banner, and sometimes I want my text on this side and the image on this side, and sometimes I want to flip it. So my image is on this side, my text is on this side. If you can have that same block going both ways, you should have examples in your test suite of rendering that block both ways. You don't want to be in a circumstance where for whatever reason it's okay here, but it's not okay there. Again, you want to make sure that your structured content is rendering properly, and you want to make sure that the theme is rendering properly. And again, just a friendly reminder, you don't have to test every single page of your site to confirm that you're okay. So takeaway 3, I'm not sure if this is obvious, this is a ghost town. Pa11y is not helpful without content and markup. So when you're thinking about automating your accessibility testing, you really do need to make sure, do we have a configuration management strategy, right? Can I set up a Drupal site and import configuration that ends up being more or less the same thing as my production website? Do I have a method of either creating content, you know, using, you know, PHP code or some other method of generating content, even devel generate, or can I use the default content module or the scenarios module or something like that to bundle up some representative content and then import that content during my build? And then my test runner is going to go out and actually test real markup from your real theme in a real configured Drupal environment with real content. And if you can't tick off all those boxes, first of all, that's okay. You're not alone. It's not trivial. Pa11y itself is pretty darn easy. Getting to that state, especially if you don't already have these things in place, again, it's not trivial. You're not alone in that. But if you don't already have these other things that I'm talking about, don't start on Pa11y yet. Go focus on those other things first and start working on those. Because otherwise you're going to get Pa11y running and you're going to go, oh shoot, this isn't actually doing anything because you don't have the other pieces in place to test against. So let's talk about how to get started with Pa11y once you actually have all these other pieces in place. First of all, I recently did this on the GovCon site in anticipation of the presentation today. So go check out this pull request. This repo is open source. You can go check it out. You can see what we're doing on GovCon with Pa11y. In order for Pa11y to work during continuous integration, you need some sort of front-end task runner. We use NPM, you can use Yarn, you could probably even make it work with Composer if you really wanted to, but NPM by far is the easiest option. You need to add Pa11y CI. There are 2 libraries. I think I have a slide on that. Yeah, there's a just normal Pa11y library, and then there's the Pa11y CI, which is a little bit more geared towards continuous integration. You need some Pa11y configuration to tell it what standard you're running against, where it needs to run, etc. And then again, for this to work, you need your web server, you need Drupal, you need your config, you need your content, etc. I don't know if everybody's familiar with Lighthouse, but just very quickly, Google Chrome has Lighthouse built into it. If your immediate reaction is, but yeah, Lighthouse doesn't really test that much. You're right, it doesn't. Pa11y tests the exact same thing. You're making my point for me. But you should be able to, as you're doing development, go into a page on your site, and you should be able to run a Lighthouse test and get 100% on that page. And if you can't get 100% on the page in Lighthouse, you're not ready to turn on Pa11y yet, right? Because much with any automated tests are only as good as you make them. Automated tests are only gonna pass or fail. And if your homepage or whatever page you're getting ready to test isn't accessible yet, the second you turn on Pa11y, it's gonna start failing your builds because you need it to pass. So when to add Pa11y in my approximation is do your site building, build your content type, build your view, do whatever site building you're gonna do. Do whatever backend development you need to do, right? If you're customizing blocks, if you're doing module development, whatever, do all that. And then when you get into your theming story, which as we said at the very top of the talk here, hopefully you're not doing much that's gonna impact markup until you're theming. When you actually start doing the theming work, your front-end developer, your full stack developer, you, whatever you got, an important part of that theming work is to actually open up Lighthouse and do a quick accessibility test. And if something fails, if something's not right, fix it. And then you turn on Pa11y for whatever feature you've just built, sort of as you open the pull request to merge in that front-end work that you're doing. So if you try to start turning on accessibility testing at the site building level, that's way too early, because at that point you don't have content, you haven't done any theming. Remember, you need content and markup. If you wait until after the theming work's been done and you go all the way down to the end of the project, that's probably too late, because at that point, you have so much different stuff sort of interacting and pounding on each other that in order to get one page to pass accessibility testing, you may actually have to go fix like 15 or 20 different features. So again, much like any other automated testing, if you can do it bit by bit as you build out your site, you're gonna have a much smaller corpus of work to do to fix it. And of course, if you already have a site and you wanna layer in accessibility testing, it's going to be a little harder. You're going to have to sort of do that analysis of what pages are we testing, what are we going to start testing first, and then make each of those things accessible and start testing them one by one. And again, you have to have realistic content to do that as you go. When something fails, and this is exactly what Lighthouse is going to tell you, but Pa11y will do it. If something fails, it's going to tell you in pretty plain English what's wrong. So on this example, we did a test and it says, this link points to a named anchor main content within the document, but no anchor exists with that name. So that means that we do have a main content link there. That's good. But there is no div or span or anything like that farther down the page that has the name of main content to actually jump to it. So to fix that error, I need to go find the twig template for my body or main content area, whatever it is on your site, and I need to go add an anchor with that name. And you sort of have to do this for each one of these items. Obviously, if it's in your custom theme or your custom content, that's pretty, your custom theme or your custom modules, it's pretty straightforward. Just go fix the twig templates or the CSS or whatever to make that work. If you find a problem in a contrib module, that's where you should actually go out to Drupal.org, open an issue, tag it and label it with accessibility, and then submit a patch to actually fix it out there. In my experience, I don't have a ton of patches on Drupal.org that have been merged, but the things that are most likely in my experience to get fixed and merged by a contrib maintainer is an accessibility issue. They may not take your exact fix, and that's okay, but again, they tend to fix accessibility issues pretty quick on Drupal.org in my experience. If you're doing this in Lighthouse, again, theoretically, Lighthouse should be telling you the exact same thing as Pa11y. You can expand these out. You can copy and paste out of Lighthouse, and you can usually go out to, either the WCAG site or some other guide. If you copy the error that you're getting, it'll literally tell you exactly how to fix it. So it's not rocket science to chase these things down and fix them. And obviously, if the accessibility is failing because of something in your content, not in your theme, not in your modules, but in your content, that should be kind of an oh crap moment where you're going, oh, the table on this page isn't accessible. Why is that? Oh, well, there's not a table header. Oh, where did this table come from? Why is this in the WYSIWYG? Like, that should start spawning some conversations. And I will say, we actually, one of my current projects at Acquia, we've had some conversations with a customer recently that's like, hey, we really want to be able to do this thing. Okay, doing this thing will have an impact on the accessibility of your site. Now, we're not saying you can't do that thing, but you now have to make a choice. Do you want your content editors to be able to put tables wherever the heck they want, whenever they want? And are you willing to pay the price of a accessibility issue whenever and wherever they do that? And you have to make that compromise, and it is a compromise. Some of them are very obvious, like, should you put a table in your WYSIWYG? My answer is no. Some of them are less obvious, like, hey, our company branding scheme is X. Well, our company colors aren't accessible, guys. What do we do about this? Well, you implement it the way we've branded it, and we know it's not accessible, but hey, it's our company colors, and we don't have a choice. Okay, right? Again, you have to sort of dig into what some of these compromises are going to mean, and if you're willing to make them. As I said right up top, once you get Pa11y, once you get Lighthouse running, it's testing the markup. So please, please, if you care about accessibility, if you want your site to be accessible, make sure that you have a license for JAWS or some other screen reading software. Make sure that you have somebody that is proactively testing your site to go through and do keyboard navigation for everything. And honestly, like, there are companies out there that you can hire that actually have people that need an accessible website, and they will do testing for you. You can hire them to do testing. So, again, think about your actual user experience. And if you don't have somebody who either is an accessibility expert or somebody who genuinely uses these tools every day, think about how you might be more inclusive in your development process to really, try to address issues. Again, as we talked about earlier, all you have to do with Pa11y to configure it. Once you get this content done, once you get the build done, you're going to just expand out the URLs that you're testing. And hopefully, as you're testing a handful or a representative handful of the pages and the features on your site. Unlike PHP Unit, unlike Behat, every one of these tests is identical, right? It's doing the same test everywhere. You just have to tell it what pages you're wanting to run it on. And during your CI process, you just have to make sure that those pages exist with content and with the right mockup and theming. Couple assumptions we've talked about sort of throughout the presentation today. A little bit of background information. If you don't know how to compile Sass or JavaScript during a build, if you don't know what this looks like, have a look at our theme on Drupal GovCon. We use Acquia's build and launch tools. You certainly don't have to do that, but it'll give you an example of what a task runner that actually will compile your theme and get everything up running and ready to go might be. And we also have some examples using config split and default content. For the GovCon site, basically what we have is we have a testing module that doesn't get enabled anywhere except in CI. And we use the config split module to do that. We have a testing specific split, that split, when it gets enabled, turns on the module. The module has default content in it. So during CI, all of this content sort of materializes that doesn't exist anywhere else, so that we know when our Pa11y tests are running, they're going to have the right stuff in the right place. And again, configuration management. If you don't know what config split is, if you don't know how to turn config split on during a build, that is a much longer topic. I have 5+ articles on config management on my blog. You can again use the GovCon repo as an example, but this isn't a config management session. We've got 6 minutes, and that's not nearly enough time to dig into that topic. So pulling this all together, development occurs under any definition of the word development, right? That could be site building, that could be backend, that could be front end, that could be content. Whatever that development is, a pull request should get opened. As part of that pull request process, you should have continuous integration running, whether that's Travis CI, pipelines from any of the umpteen companies that offer a pipelines product, whatever. One of your automated tests that should run during that CI process is Pa11y. And then obviously you want to make sure that your builds are configured to fail if your accessibility tests fail, right? I had a conversation with somebody recently that's like, well, why would we want our tests to fail a build? It's like, well, why would you put automated testing on something if it's not going to fail the build? That it's not informative. It's not there just as an FYI. Like it's there to tell you, hey, dummy, you screwed something up. Stop, don't do it, fix it, right? That is a build failure. You should do that. And again, warning, just because a build passes, just because a build fails, that by no means tells you that everything's okay, right? If somebody adds a new feature but didn't add a new test to test that feature, I don't know. If nobody did manual testing, I don't know, right? Know what you're testing, know what you're not testing. It'll save your butt. And again, last test or last takeaway, you know, automating it is the best option for monitoring for regression. Every code change should be tested, but don't forget about the manual testing. Automation is key, but it is not the only key. I may have missed some other sessions, but if you're interested in accessibility, there were at least 3 others here at Drupal GovCon. I believe, unfortunately, most of these were yesterday, so I don't think you'll catch any more live. But all of the sessions will be posted online so that you can catch them retrospectively. Stay in touch. Like I said, hit me up on Twitter, check out my blog. Here's my email if you have questions. I will be monitoring Slack in just a little bit. But let's do some Q&A now. I see Max asking, so the primary benefit of Pa11y over browser extensions is that it can be automated and added to CI instead of remembering to check everything manually. Yes, that's exactly it. I'm not actually advocating for you to stop using browser extensions. They're super useful, and in many ways they're more informative than Pa11y, but Pa11y is something just like your other, hopefully other automated tests that you have, you know it's going to run every time on every code change to make sure that there's not a whoopsie. James is saying they're using automated Google Lighthouse tests on Tugboat. So that's another option. You know, just like many testing frameworks, I'm talking about Pa11y here because it's what I use personally. I have no direct involvement with that project. At the end of the day, as long as you have an option for doing automated testing, that's the important thing. Pa11y is awesome, but if you can use Lighthouse as well, that would be great.
Hey, Mike, there was a question earlier from Max that wasn't really
Oh, did I miss one? Let me.
It just didn't have a question at the end. I find content editors frequently choosing wrong heading levels, but heading levels must be chosen manually in the WYSIWYG, I think is the context here. So
yes. So the first thing I actually recommend is disabling, again, keep the scissors capped, keep people out of trouble. I typically disable the H1 tag in my WYSIWYG. If my content is always nested down at a level that's always below an H2, I'll disable H2 as well. Now at a certain point, like I can't, you know, I can't completely fix that. At a certain point, like you do need your content team to understand that your your headings need to be in order, right? You can't fix that. But again, there are things you can do to keep people out of trouble just by restricting which tags can go into the WYSIWYG and setting up your theme templates appropriately. George is asking, does Pa11y check the exact same items as Axe or Wave? Are there differences? I'm not an expert on any of these technologies, George, so I honestly don't know the answer to that question. I would say that if you're testing the same standard in all of the tools, again, WCAG 2.0 AA or AAA or whatever, you should see the same results, because theoretically the different tools are just testing the markup against the same standard. But, you know, are you going to get 100% the exact same result? I'm not sure. Does Pa11y scan multiple pages at once, or is it one at a time? I think it sequentially goes through and loads each one individually, one at a time. It is pretty darn fast, but yeah, it is page after page after page. It'll just cycle through that, that array that you define. James suggests that you can use SiteImprove to show accessibility testing on content as editors are writing it. Yep, that's a great call out. There's also a CK editor accessibility plugin that you can grab that'll help with warning editors as you're creating content. These are great stopgap measures, and they're great alerting. But I also think, like I said earlier, that doesn't alleviate the need from, you know, intelligently configuring your site to try to keep people out of danger as much as possible. What other questions or comments do we have? I know we're running short on time. Is Pa11y able to replicate contextual states like being logged in or having a modal dialog open? You might be able to script that, but I think in general, no. My experience has just been it's going to go to a page and it's going to read the markup there. So, you know, if you have a page that is normally only accessible while you're logged in, that's a great example of something you can fake during your CI process so that you can make it available to your anonymous test runner. You know, maybe that's not, maybe it's not real data if you have sensitive data, or maybe it's not a real user account, it's a simulated version of that page. There are things you can do to get smart with how you test it. And in terms of something being a modal being open or expanded or not, remember Pa11y's testing the markup of the page. So if you're doing something like with React, where you're like injecting something into the page that's not there already, that would be a problem. But you know, typically with a lot of those like accordion modals and things like that, the markup's already on the page, right? So whether it's open or not, it's going to see it, and if there's something funky, it'll tell you about it. Is Pa11y able to catch line length issues? That is a great question. I think with Pa11y, you do have an option, and I don't see it in this config file, but I think you have an option in Pa11y to set what viewport you want to test, Ralph. I don't know that one for sure, but you can check the Pa11y config. I think you can tell it, you know, how many different viewports you want it to test in.
And with that, I think we're going to have to end the session for today. Thanks again to Mike and everyone else for listening.
Thanks, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of your Friday.
Yeah, enjoy the last session for today.
Bye, everyone. Happy Friday.
All right.